Eggs have long been marketed as this ultimate health food that's packed with proteins and so many nutrients that are essential for our well-being. And it's become a staple in so many households. However, if you go on to search and try and identify whether this food is good or bad for you, you'll find so many conflicting views, even among the alternative medical professionals. And this can leave you in quite a confused state, really wondering whether this food is essential or it's not essential. I found myself in this conflicted position. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to deep dive into the consumption of eggs. Is it something that we should be consuming, or is it a food that has just been marketed as being healthy but not really having any of those true beneficial effects for our health? And one thing to understand about the consumption of eggs is that this is a huge industry and that there is a lot of money behind pushing the consumption of eggs, given that it's a staple in so many households. Now, this is something to be mindful of whenever you come across studies, research studies that are advocating for the consumption of eggs. It's important to understand who is funding these studies and how they are reaching these conclusions, because these conclusions may have been adapted to benefit a lot of these companies that profit take out of the consumption of eggs. So please be mindful of that whenever you come across scientific studies. And that is why I want to share with you a perspective today that will hopefully help you overcome ever needing to look to scientific studies ever again. So let's get into it. I'm going to share with you 3 perspectives that I think can be quite helpful in helping you also come to a decision on whether you should consume eggs or whether you shouldn't consume eggs. The first perspective I want to get into, and one that I think is probably the most important aspect, and that is listening to your body. Everyone's body constitution is different. Everyone's genetic makeup is also different. At least that's based on my understanding. And this is the reason why it's so important that we listen to our own body whenever we consume a food, to notice its effects. Notice its effects while you're consuming the food, after you consume the food, and start to journal perhaps what the effects are every time you consume this food. Is it making you feel more energetic? Is it bringing vibrancy? Is it bringing that energy into your life? Or is it end up sapping that energy and vitality from your life? This is really helpful when it comes to deciding whether food is good for you or not good for you. A lot of times we ignore these signals that our body is giving us, and sometimes it requires that we take on a mono-meal approach in order to better understand whether a certain food type is actually beneficial or having a good effect on us, or whether it's really taking energy out and really leaving us feeling weak after consuming that food. So this is something that I think is really critical. My personal perspective is I noticed that consuming eggs often gave me heartburn. It often led me to feeling worse after consuming it. I felt like as if my energy was sapped, and I felt weaker the next day as well. So this is something that I was starting to become very mindful of, because I was also led down this path of confusion where my natural health practitioners and doctors kept advocating for the consumption of eggs, kept telling me that it's essential and that I need to get protein in order to sustain a healthy life. However, it's important to listen to your own body. And sometimes we come across a lot of conflicting views when it comes to eggs. There'll be a lot of alternative medical professionals as well that are mainstream, that are really going to advocate for the consumption of eggs. But at the end of the day, it always comes down to how you are feeling and whether it's having a good or bad effect on your health. If it's aggravating your chronic health condition, it's definitely a sign that you should not be consuming this food. So that's the first point. Let's move on to the second key aspect. And this is the aspect which I learned from Medical Medium, and one that I think we should give thought to or consideration to when we're considering the consumption of eggs. One, because I feel it's very important to recognize these aspects that are not sort of the mainstream perspectives to consider when we deciding whether or not to consume eggs. And also, given what the world has experienced lately especially for people who've gone down the research rabbit hole trying to understand better how a lot of viruses and bacteria that are affecting us actually come about. And this is the perspective that Medical Medium shares. He often states that eggs should not be consumed because eggs are the primary food source to feed a lot of the lab-grown viruses, such as the pandemic virus that we recently experienced. So one of the critical reasons why we should abstain from consumption of eggs in order not to aggravate these conditions within ourselves. And it's also because a lot of these viruses are dormant within us because they are throughout our environment. So it's so hard to avoid being infected by these viruses. We may have gotten it through our hereditary, or you may have gotten it through exposure to certain foods, certain environments. It's almost impossible to avoid it. However, what we can do is avoid consuming foods that we know will end up feeding these viruses. And I think this is a really critical aspect to give adequate consideration to. Given what we know now, and given all the research that has come to light when it relates to lab-grown viruses and understanding how these lab-grown viruses are being cultivated. And I think this is something that's really important as well to consider, especially when it comes to the consumption of eggs. Because if this is something that is contributing to a lot of the chronic conditions that people are facing, then it might be worthwhile to exclude this from your diet, especially if you have a chronic condition. Okay, so let's get into the third and final factor that is played quite a predominant role in my decision making. Now, it need not be something that is aligned with your understanding. However, I think it's something that I gave quite a lot of consideration to, and that I also have an alternative suggestion. If you still think that eggs play a critical role in your diet and something that is probably making you feel better, then something you may want to consider. So from this perspective, it's understanding the industrialized component of it and how these chickens and poultry are being treated, especially the ones that are grown in these cages and coops that are so stuffed with so many of these chickens. They pumped with chemicals, they pump with antibiotics, they end up becoming much more of a synthetic creature than an actual natural creature. And we can just imagine what is going into the eggs as a result of this. So you end up consuming the synthetic version of an egg. It's not natural in its true essence. It's also a lot of cruelty and a lot of negative energy that ends up within these environments. It's no way, shape, or form natural. And there's so many documentaries that cover this aspect. So this is something I think we need to be mindful of if you are consuming eggs. Now, fortunately, some people that are still very much of the belief that eggs are beneficial for your health, and maybe your body's experiencing more energy and vitality from the consumption of eggs. Then if this is the case, then try and source your eggs from a local farmer that may have much more organic, natural practices in terms of getting eggs from the chickens, not using any chemicals or anything synthetic, feeding the chickens the natural diet, allowing them to roam free in their fields, and ensuring that the chickens are treated very humanely. In that case, it's a totally different energy dynamic, and the ethical considerations are much more easier to take on as well, because then you know it's something that is a much more natural practice and something that's been followed for generations. However, even given these arguments, and even given the possibility of people being able to source it from more local farmers who grow it in an organic way, or maybe you have your own chicken coop, I'm still of the opinion that if it's contributing towards a chronic condition, it's better to avoid it. And at the end of the day, listening to your body is probably the most important factor when it comes to the consumption of eggs. So there you go. Share with me any of your thoughts when it comes to the consumption of eggs. Have you found it to be contributing to your chronic condition? Have you found it to be beneficial or adding to your health? I'd love to hear your perspectives as well. With that, thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.